celestial ballroom, with a sound like a gunshot. 600 heads turned in unison toward the source of the disturbance, conversations dying mid-sentence as the city's elite witnessed something unprecedented. Mia stood at the center of the grand staircase in a red Valentino gown that cost more than most people's cars, her hand still extended from throwing the drink, her face a mask of fury that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so terrifying. At the bottom of those stairs, champagne dripping from his perfectly tailored Brioni suit, stood Derek. The Derek. The man who controlled half of New York's underground economy. The man senators courted and FBI agents feared. The man who could end lives with a text message and had built an empire on the bodies of men who'd underestimated him. And he was letting a 26-year-old art authentication specialist publicly humiliate him without saying a word. "You absolute bastard!" Mia's voice carried across the ballroom with crystalline clarity, her words sharp as broken glass. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I was that stupid?" Derek wiped champagne from his face with a white pocket square, his movements deliberate and controlled. His dark eyes, the color of smoke and gunmetal, never left Mia's face. Around them, phones were already emerging from evening bags and jacket pockets. By morning, this would be everywhere. "Mia," he said, his voice low and measured, sounding almost dangerous. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Privately?" Mia laughed, and it was a sharp, brittle sound. "You want privacy now? After what you did? After you used me, manipulated me, lied to every single person in this room about who you are and what you wanted?" She descended 3 stairs, close enough now that she could see the muscle ticking in Derek's jaw, the only sign that he wasn't as calm as he appeared. Good. She wanted him angry. She wanted him humiliated the way she'd been humiliated when she discovered the truth. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mia addressed the crowd, her arms spread wide like a conductor before an orchestra. "Let me tell you about Derek, the man you all admire, fear, and court. The man who donated 10 million to the Metropolitan Museum last month. The man who sits on the board of 3 children's hospitals." She paused for effect, and the ballroom held its breath. "He's been using the Castellani Gallery, my gallery, the one I've dedicated my entire career to building, to launder money from his criminal enterprises. Every painting I authenticated, every sale I facilitated, every auction I curated was part of his scheme. He made me complicit in crimes I didn't even know I was committing." The gasps that followed were audible even over the string quartet, which had stopped playing entirely. Mia saw shock on familiar faces, her meant friend Sophia. She saw calculation on others, District Attorney Morrison, whose campaign Derek had funded, Senator Williams, who owed Derek more favors than she could count, and she saw something else on a few faces. Satisfaction. The enemies Derek had made over 15 years of ruthless business were pleased to see him brought low. "For 6 months," Mia continued, her voice breaking just slightly, "and wasn't that perfect? Just the right amount of vulnerability? He courted me, took me to dinners at restaurants. You need reservations 6 months in advance to access. Sent me flowers every Monday because I once mentioned I hated Mondays. Introduced me to his family, his friends, his world." She descended 2 more stairs, close enough now to see the silver threading through Derek's dark hair at his temples, to smell his cologne, something custom made that probably cost $1,000 an ounce. And all of it was a lie. Every word, every gesture, every moment. He didn't want me. He wanted access to my expertise, my reputation, my gallery. He wanted someone naive enough to authenticate his stolen art and legitimate enough that no one would question the sales. Mia reached into her clutch, a vintage Judith Lieber that had belonged to her grandmother, and pulled out a stack of papers. She threw them at Derek's feet, and they scattered across the marble like confetti. Authentication certificates for paintings that are forgeries, bills of sale for artwork stolen from private collections in Europe, transaction records that trace directly back to shell companies he controls. All of it with my signature, my seal, my professional reputation. She was at the bottom of the stairs now, close enough to touch him. Derek hadn't moved, hadn't tried to stop her, hadn't said a word beyond that initial attempt at privacy. His security team, she could see them positioned around the ballroom, recognizable by their identical earpieces and the way they moved, waited for orders that didn't come. You used me, Mia said, and this time her voice dropped to something only Derek could hear. You made me fall in love with you, and it was all for this. For your business. For your empire. Something flickered in Derek's eyes. Pain, maybe? Or was it satisfaction? Mia couldn't tell, and right now she didn't care. She raised her voice again, addressing the crowd. I've turned over all evidence to the FBI. Every document, every email, every piece of communication. Derek's empire is built on lies, theft, and blood money. And I was his unwitting accomplice. She pulled off the diamond bracelet he'd given her 2 weeks ago, Cartier, vintage, worth more than her entire year's salary, and let it fall at his feet with a clatter that sounded obscenely loud in the silent ballroom. We're done. The gallery is closed. Every authentication I've ever done for you is now under federal review. And you? She looked him straight in the eye, letting all her rage and hurt and betrayal show on her face. You can go. To hell. Mia turned on her heel and walked toward the exit, her red gown flowing behind her like blood. The crowd parted for her automatically, 600 of New York's most powerful people moving aside like she was radioactive. She didn't look back. She didn't see the small smile that curved Derek's lips as he watched her go. She didn't see him nod once to a man in the shadows, a gesture so subtle that only someone looking for it would have noticed. She didn't know that every word she'd said, every accusation she'd thrown at him, every piece of evidence she'd turned over to the FBI was exactly what Derek had been counting on. The humiliation was perfect, public, devastating, and completely according to plan. The Castellani Gallery occupied a converted warehouse in Chelsea, all exposed brick and soaring ceilings and light that poured through floor-to-ceiling windows like liquid gold. Mia had fallen in love with the space 5 years ago when she'd first started out of Columbia with a master's degree in art history and a specialty in authentication techniques that had made her the youngest expert in her field. Now, at 26, she owned the gallery. Dr. Hayne left the business to her, along with a client list that read like a who's who of New York society and a reputation for authentication so rigorous that insurance companies accepted her certificates without question. She was examining a painting in her office, a supposed Vermeer that she was 90% certain was an excellent 19th century forgery, when her assistant knocked on the door. Mia, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. Mia looked up from the painting, her magnifying glass still in hand. Did he give a name? Derek. Just Derek. The name meant nothing to her, though something in the way her assistant said it made Mia think it should. Tell him I'm busy. If he wants an authentication, he can make an appointment like everyone else. Her assistant, a Columbia art history student named Jamie who needed the work-study hours, shifted uncomfortably. He said you'd say that. He also said to tell you he's interested in acquiring the Castellani collection. Mia's hand stilled. The Castellani collection was a series of 15 Renaissance paintings that had belonged to the gallery's original owner, Giuseppe Castellani, who'd fled Italy during World War II with everything he could carry. The collection was worth approximately $30 million, had never been for sale, and was the reason the gallery bore the Castellani name. For those paintings over the years, he'd turned down every offer without exception, because they were the heart of the gallery, the pieces that gave the space its soul and credibility. Tell him, Mia said carefully, that the collection isn't for sale. It never has been, and it never will be. Jamie disappeared, and Mia tried to return her attention to the Vermeer. But 5 minutes later, her assistant was back. He's still here. He says he understands the collection has sentimental value, and he's prepared to make it worth your while. His words, not mine. Mia set down her magnifying glass with more force than necessary. Fine. Send him in. I'll tell him no in person. She expected a tech billionaire, one of the Silicon Valley types who'd moved to New York and thought money could buy anything, including history and soul. Or maybe an old money wasp with a last name that appeared in the social register and a belief that art was just another asset to acquire. What walked through her door was neither. Derek was tall, at least 6'2", with dark hair that was just long enough to suggest he didn't care about corporate grooming standards, and eyes that were an unsettling shade of gray. He wore a black suit that fit him like it had been born on his body, no tie, white shirt open at the collar. There was a scar that cut through his left eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline, and his hands, Mia noticed hands, artists always did, were scarred across the knuckles like he'd spent time hitting things harder than they'd hit him back. He looked like money and violence had a baby and raised it on expensive scotch and classical literature. Miss Mia, he said, and his voice was smoke and gravel. Thank you for seeing me. I'm seeing you so I can tell you no in person, Mia replied, standing behind her desk like it was a fortress. The Castellani collection isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone, not ever. Everything is for sale, Derek said, moving into the room with the confidence of a man who'd never been denied anything. It's just a matter of finding the right price. Then you fundamentally misunderstand both art and me. Mia crossed her arms. Those paintings are the foundation of this gallery's reputation. They're not commodities. No, Derek agreed, stopping in front of a small Caravaggio sketch that hung on her office wall. Not part of the Castellani as a graduation present. They're investments in cultural heritage, pieces of human history preserved in oil and canvas. I understand that better than you might think. He turned to look at her, and Mia felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. I'm not interested in buying them to hide them in a vault or flip them at auction. I want to display them properly, create a foundation, a museum that would bear the Castellani name and honor Giuseppe's legacy. It was a good pitch. A great pitch, actually. The kind of pitch that suggested Derek had done his research, knew exactly what buttons to push. If you want to honor Giuseppe's legacy, Mia said, then respect his wishes. He wanted those paintings here, in this gallery, accessible to students and scholars and anyone who wanted to see them, not locked away in some private foundation. Your current security is inadequate. Derek moved to the window, looked out at the street below. You have a basic alarm system and cameras that haven't been updated in 5 years. Those paintings are worth $30 million. You're one break-in away from losing everything Giuseppe built. How do you know what security system I have? Mia's voice sharpened with suspicion. Derek smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested he knew many things he probably shouldn't. I make it my business to know about valuable assets in this city. And you, Miss Mia, are sitting on one of the most valuable private collections in New York with security that wouldn't stop a determined art student, much less a professional thief. Then I'll upgrade my security. Thank you for your concern, but the answer is still no. I expected you'd say that. Derek pulled a business card from his jacket pocket and set it on her desk. Matte black with silver embossing. A name, a phone number, nothing else. When you change your mind, and you will, call me. I won't change my mind. We'll see. He moved toward the door, then paused. That Vermeer you're working on? It's a forgery. 19th century. Probably 1840s. The pigments are right for the period, but the canvas preparation is wrong. Vermeer used a double grind technique for his grounds that wasn't documented until the 1950s. A forger working in the 1840s wouldn't have known to replicate it. Mia stared at him. She'd spent 3 days analyzing that painting, and she'd come to the same conclusion. But the canvas ground analysis was something she'd been planning to do next, the final test to confirm her suspicion. How did you? I told you, Derek said. I understand art better than you might think. The Castellani collection deserves better than this gallery can offer, and you deserve better security than what you have. Think about it. He left, And Mia stood there staring at the door for a full minute before she picked up his business card. Just a name, just a number. She should have thrown it away. Instead, she slipped it into her desk drawer and tried to forget about the man with the scarred hands and the unsettling eyes who knew things he shouldn't about both Art and her. She succeeded for almost 12 hours. The break-in happened at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Mia got the call from the alarm company at 2:52, and she was in an Uber heading to the gallery by 2:55, her heart hammering against her ribs and her mind racing through everything that could be stolen, damaged, lost. The Castellani collection, 15 irreplaceable paintings, $30 million in cultural heritage. Please, she thought, clutching her phone so hard her knuckles went white. Please let them be safe. The police were already there when she arrived, along with two crime scene technicians and a detective who introduced himself as Morrison. The gallery's front window was smashed, glass glittering on the sidewalk like diamonds. Miss Mia? Detective Morrison was in his 50s, with tired eyes and a wedding ring that looked like it hadn't come off in 20 years. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but they got away with 3 paintings. Small ones, easy to transport. We're reviewing security footage now. Which 3? Mia's voice came out steady, which was a miracle given that she felt like she was going to vomit. Morrison consulted his notebook. According to the inventory, a Monet sketch, a small Degas, and something called a Bellini Madonna. Relief hit her so hard she actually swayed. Not the Castellani collection? No, ma'am. Looks like they were going for quantity over quality. Grabbed what was closest to the door and ran. The stolen pieces were valuable, insured for about 2 million combined, but they weren't irreplaceable. They weren't Giuseppe's legacy. Full, but not essential. Still, $2 million. Gone in the time it took to smash a window and grab 3 frames. We'll need you to review the footage, Morrison said. See if you recognize anyone, and you'll want to call your insurance company. Mia spent the next 3 hours going through security footage that showed 2 figures in dark clothes and ski masks who knew exactly where the cameras were and how to avoid giving the police anything useful. They were professionals, in and out, in under 2 minutes. By the time the police left, and she'd called her insurance company and left messages for her lawyer and her insurance adjuster, the sun was coming up. Mia sat in her office, surrounded by the aftermath of the break-in, and stared at the Castellani collection. Still here. Still safe. But for how long? She pulled Derek's card from her desk drawer and looked at it for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. He answered on the second ring. Miss Mia, I was wondering when you'd call. How did you know? Her voice was raw from hours of talking to police and insurance adjusters and answering the same questions over and over. How did you know I was vulnerable? I told you. I make it my business to know about valuable assets in this city. There was no satisfaction in his voice, just a statement of fact. Are you hurt? No. They came in the middle of the night. Took 3 paintings. Could have taken more. Could have taken the Castellani collection if they'd known what they were looking at. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, do you have security there now? The police swept the building. They left an hour ago. I'm sending someone. His name is Marcus. He'll arrive in 20 minutes, and he'll stay until we can get proper security installed. I can't afford. Consider it a courtesy. No obligations. Derek's voice softened almost imperceptibly. Get some rest, Mia. We'll talk tomorrow when you're not running on adrenaline and fear. He hung up before she could argue. 20 minutes later, exactly as promised, a man who introduced himself as Marcus arrived. He was built like a tank, with kind eyes that didn't match his intimidating frame, and he positioned himself in the gallery's main room like he was prepared to fight off an army. Mr. Derek said to tell you that you're safe now, Marcus said. Nothing's getting past me. Mia wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need Derek's protection or his courtesy or his men stationed in her gallery. But she was exhausted and scared, and $2 million had just walked out of her gallery like it was nothing. So she just said, "Thank you," and went to her office to try to process what had just happened. On her desk, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Rest. I'll call you at noon. We have things to discuss. D. Mia stared at the message for a long time. She'd called him for help, and he'd sent it without hesitation, without demands, without making her beg. Which was either a sign that Derek was genuinely trying to help, or a sign that he was very, very good at playing a long game. Mia was too tired to figure out which. She lay down on the couch in her office, with Marcus standing guard in her gallery, and fell into a sleep haunted by smashed windows and paintings that disappeared into smoke. Derek called at noon, exactly. Mia had managed about 4 hours of sleep, a shower in the gallery's small bathroom, and 2 cups of coffee that tasted like regret. Her insurance adjuster had already been by, taking photos and making sympathetic noises about deductibles. Her lawyer had called to walk her through the claims process, and Marcus was still in her gallery, now accompanied by another man who introduced himself as James and looked like he could bench press a car. Thank you for sending Marcus and James, Mia said when she answered Derek's call. But I can't afford private security. My insurance will cover some of it, but we need to talk about the Castellani collection, Derek interrupted gently. Not about buying it, about protecting it. I'm listening. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks from your gallery, Cafe Luminosa. Meet me there in 30 minutes. I can't leave the gallery right now. The police might call, and I'm waiting for. Marcus and James will handle anything that comes up. You need to eat something that isn't coffee and adrenaline, and we need to have a conversation that you'll want to have somewhere neutral. 30 minutes, Mia. He hung up before she could argue, which seemed to be his pattern. Mia looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. She'd put on jeans and a sweater this morning, her hair was in a messy bun, and there were circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. She looked like she'd been through a crisis, which was accurate. She should have said no. Should have insisted they talk at the gallery, or over the phone, or not at all. Instead, she found herself walking to Cafe Luminosa 28 minutes later. Derek was already there, at a corner table with a view of the street. He stood when she approached, a gesture of old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with everything else about him. You look exhausted, he said, pulling out her chair. I've had better nights. Mia sat, and a server appeared immediately with a menu and a knowing smile that suggested Derek was a regular. What's this about, Derek? If you're going to use the break-in as leverage to buy the collection, I'm going to use the break-in as evidence that you need help. He ordered coffee and food for both of them without asking what she wanted, which should have annoyed her, but instead felt oddly comforting. Last night wasn't random. Mia's blood went cold. What do you mean? I mean that thieves who are sophisticated enough to avoid your cameras and know exactly where to find valuable pieces don't grab random paintings closest to the door. They were sending a message. To who? To me? To me. Derek leaned back in his chair, and for the first time Mia saw something that might have been anger in his eyes. You refused to sell the Castellani collection to me yesterday morning. Last night your gallery was robbed. That's not a coincidence. You think someone's trying to force me to sell? I think someone is trying to demonstrate that you can't protect what you have, that you need help, whether you want it or not. He paused as the server brought coffee and pastries that Mia didn't remember ordering. And they're right. You do need help. So what do you suggest? I sell to you and let someone else win? I suggest, Derek said carefully, that we work together. You keep ownership of the collection, keep it in the gallery, maintain Giuseppe's legacy. I provide security, insurance, and protection that actually works. In exchange, I get something I need. Which is legitimacy. Derek's smile was sharp and self-aware. I'm what you might call an art enthusiast with a complicated past. I've acquired pieces over the years through methods that would make your ethics board nervous. But I'm trying to go legitimate, build something real. Having my name associated with yours, with the Castellani Gallery's reputation, would help with that. You want to use my reputation to launder your image. I want us to help each other. You get security and resources you can't afford on your own. I get credibility in the art world that I can't buy. It's mutually beneficial. Mia sipped her coffee, buying time to think. Everything Derek was saying made sense, but there was something underneath it, something she couldn't quite identify. "What's your complicated past?" she asked. "Who are you really, Derek?" He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested she'd asked exactly the question he'd been waiting for. "I'm someone who built a business empire through means both legal and less legal. I've got connections to organizations that operate outside the law. I've made enemies and fortunes in equal measure. And now I'm trying to become legitimate, which is harder than building the empire in the first place. You're a criminal. I'm a businessman who's operated in gray areas. And before you judge, consider that every major fortune in this city was built the same way. The Vanderbilts, the Rockefellers, the Kennedys, they all started with dirty money and laundered it into respectability. I'm just doing it faster. And you think I'm going to help you? I think you don't have much choice." Derek leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Last night was a warning, Mia. Someone wanted to show you how vulnerable you are. If I'm right about who's behind it, and I'm usually right, they'll try again. Harder this time, they'll target the Castellani collection directly, and your basic security won't stop them. So I either work with you or lose everything Giuseppe built. Or you could go to the police, upgrade your security with legitimate firms, and hope that whoever did this last night gets caught before they try again." Derek's tone made it clear what he thought of that option. "But we both know that won't happen. The police have a 3% solve rate for art theft in this city. Your insurance will eventually pay out, but it won't replace irreplaceable art, and you'll spend the rest of your career wondering when they'll come back." Mia hated that he was right. Hated that she was sitting in a cafe with a man who'd just admitted to being a criminal, seriously considering his proposal. "What exactly would this partnership look like?" "I provide security for the gallery. Top tier, military grade, the kind that makes the Metropolitan Museum look underprotected. I also provide insurance through companies I control. Don't worry, they're legitimate, at rates you can actually afford. And I provide connections, access to collectors and dealers who wouldn't normally work with someone your age. And in exchange, you authenticate pieces for my collection, help me acquire art through legitimate means. Let me use the Castellani Gallery's name and reputation to establish myself in the legitimate art world. And maybe, eventually, you consider letting me create that foundation I mentioned, not taking the collection from you, but building something bigger around it." It was everything Mia had worked for: security, resources, access to collectors who could make her career, wrapped up in a deal with a man who might be the devil himself. "I need to think about it. Take 24 hours. Derek pulled out a different business card, this one with an address written on the back in bold handwriting. "Come to this address tomorrow night at 8. I want to show you something that might help you decide." "What is it?" "My collection, the one I'm trying to legitimize. I think you'll find it interesting." Mia took the card, her fingers brushing his briefly. Hands were warm, and up close, she could see that the scars on his knuckles were old, silvered with time. "If I come tomorrow, it doesn't mean I'm agreeing to anything." "Of course not." Derek's smile suggested he knew she was already halfway convinced. "It just means you're curious. And curiosity is the first step toward every great partnership." He stood, dropped enough cash on the table to cover both their meals and a generous tip, and left Mia sitting alone with her coffee and a decision that would change everything. She stayed there for another hour, staring at the address on the back of his card, trying to convince herself that going to Derek's private collection was a terrible idea. She failed. At 7:55 the following evening, Mia stood outside an address in Tribeca that turned out to be a converted warehouse with no sign, no indication of what was inside. Just a plain door with a keypad and a camera pointed at whoever was standing where she was standing. She rang the bell. The door opened immediately, and Marcus was there, looking exactly as intimidating as he had in her gallery. "Miss Mia, Mr. Derek is expecting you. Please, come in." The interior of the warehouse was nothing like Mia had expected. Where she'd anticipated something cold and industrial, she found warmth. Exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, and lighting that was clearly designed by someone who understood how to display art. And the art itself? Mia stopped breathing. The walls were covered in paintings that belonged in museums. A Caravaggio that she recognized from photographs. A small Rembrandt that had been stolen from a private collection in Amsterdam 3 years ago. A Monet that the insurance companies had given up for lost. My God, she whispered. Impressive, isn't it? Derek's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him in dark slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. Welcome to my problem. This is stolen art, all of it. Some of these pieces have been missing for years. I prefer to think of it as rescued art. Derek moved to stand beside her, looking up at the Caravaggio. That piece was in a private collection in Milan, locked in a vault where no one could see it. The family who owned it were using it as collateral for loans, didn't care about the art, just the value. So I acquired it. You stole it. I paid for it. The people I paid weren't the legal owners, but they had possession, and possession is 9/10 of the law. He turned to look at her. Most of these pieces were in similar situations. Locked away, hidden, used as financial instruments instead of being appreciated as art. I've given them a home where they can be seen, studied, valued for what they are. By you, in private, where no one else can see them. Exactly. Derek gestured around the warehouse. Which is my problem. I've spent 15 years acquiring one of the finest private collections in the world, and I can't show it to anyone. Can't loan pieces to museums. Can't have scholars study them. Can't do anything that would draw attention to the fact that I own art that's supposed to be in police evidence lockers or insurance company files. He walked further into the warehouse and Mia followed, unable to stop herself from studying each piece. They were all real, all authentic, all extraordinary. I want to go legitimate, Derek continued. I want to create a foundation, have these pieces studied and restored and eventually displayed where people can see them. But I can't do that without someone who can authenticate the pieces, create documentation, help me establish provenance that's flexible enough to pass muster. You want me to help you launder stolen art? I want you to help me give these pieces a second life. Most of them were already stolen. From Jewish families during World War II, from churches during political upheavals, from private collectors by other thieves. I'm just the most recent link in a long chain. If we can establish new provenance, we can legitimize them, give them back to the world. Mia stood in front of a Vermeer that had been missing since 1972. A small piece. A woman reading a letter, the light falling across her face with that impossible luminosity that only Vermeer could achieve. This is from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist, she breathed. It is. Along with two others I have in climate-controlled storage. The FBI has been looking for them for 50 years. They'll never find them because they're looking in the wrong places, expecting them beside her. But if we could create a story about them being found in an estate sale, hidden in an attic, with just enough documentation to make it plausible, they could go home, back to the museum where they belong. Eventually. He turned to face her fully. That's what I'm offering, Mia. Not just security for your gallery and legitimacy for me. A chance to return some of the world's greatest stolen art to where it belongs. To be a hero instead of a thief. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And completely illegal on at least a dozen levels. I could lose my license, my reputation, everything I've built. You could, if we get caught, but we won't, because we'll be careful and patient and smart about it. Derek moved closer, and Mia caught the scent of his cologne, something that smelled like cedar and smoke. I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm just showing you what's possible, what we could accomplish together. Mia looked around the warehouse full of stolen masterpieces, thought about her gallery, vulnerable and underprotected, thought about Giuseppe's collection, 15 paintings that could disappear as easily as the 3 that had been taken 2 nights ago. Thought about the fact that Derek was offering her everything she needed, wrapped in a proposal that was either brilliantly altruistic or cunningly manipulative. Why me? She asked. There are dozens of authentication experts in this city, people with more experience, more credentials, fewer scruples. Why offer this to me? Derek smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested she'd asked exactly the right question. Because you're brilliant, talented, and honest. Because your reputation is impeccable, which is exactly what I need. Because you care about art for its own sake, not just as a commodity. And because he paused, his hand coming up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture so casual and intimate that Mia's breath caught. Because I think you and I could do extraordinary things together, if you're brave enough to try. Mia should have stepped back, should have reminded him that this was a business discussion, that they barely knew each other, that nothing about this situation called for touching. Instead, she stood very still and let him look at her like she was one of the masterpieces on his walls. I need time to think. Of course. Derek stepped back, professional distance restored. Marcus will drive you home. Call me when you've decided. As Mia left the warehouse, escorted by Marcus to a car that was probably worth more than her gallery, she knew she was going to say yes. Not because she believed Derek's altruistic motivations about returning stolen art to the world, but because for the first time in her careful, structured life, she was being offered a chance to do something dangerous and exciting and possibly world-changing. And she wanted it. She wanted it so badly she could taste it. Mia called Derek 3 days later and said yes. Within a week, the Castellani Gallery had security that would make Fort Knox nervous. Cameras with facial recognition, motion sensors that could detect a mouse, guards who rotated in 12-hour shifts, insurance coverage that protected not just against theft, but against natural disasters, civil unrest, and acts of God. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt owned. Derek came by the gallery every day, ostensibly to check on the security installation, but really, Mia suspected, to establish his presence. To make it clear to whoever had orchestrated the break-in that the Castellani Gallery was now under his protection. It worked. Within 2 weeks, word had spread through the art world that Mia had a new partner. Someone with deep pockets and dangerous connections. The kind of person you didn't cross if you wanted to continue operating in New York. Her phone started ringing more. Collectors who'd never given her the time of day suddenly wanted authentications. Dealers who'd written her off as too young invited her to private viewings. Her business tripled overnight, all because of Derek. You're getting a reputation, her friend Sophia said over lunch one afternoon. Sophia worked at Christie's and had her finger on the pulse of New York's art world. People are calling you Derek's protege. I'm not his protege. We're partners. Right. Partners. Sophia's tone suggested she didn't believe that for a second. Mia, be careful. Derek's got a reputation that makes people nervous. He's connected to organizations that operate outside the law. The FBI has been trying to build a case against him for years. He's trying to go legitimate. And you believe him? Mia thought about the warehouse full of stolen art, about Derek's proposal to return pieces to museums through carefully constructed provenance, about the way he looked at paintings like they were sacred instead of valuable. I think he's complicated, she said carefully. But yes, I think he's genuine about wanting to legitimize his collection. Sophia gave her a long look. You're sleeping with him, aren't you? What? No, it's purely professional. Mia, I've known you since Columbia. I know what you look like when you're interested in someone, and the way you say his name. Sophia shook her head. Just be careful. Men like Derek don't do anything without ulterior motives. Mia wanted to argue, but she couldn't. Because Sophia was right about one thing. Mia was interested in Derek. More interested than she should be in a business partner who was probably using her for his own purposes. She noticed things. The way his hands moved when he examined paintings, reverent and knowledgeable. The scar that cut through his eyebrow and the one on his jaw that suggested violence in his past. How he spoke to his security team. Respectful. Never condescending. Like they were colleagues instead of employees. How he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, like she was another masterpiece he wanted to acquire. It should have scared her. Instead, it thrilled her in ways she didn't want to examine too closely. 2 months into their partnership, Derek invited her to dinner at his penthouse. I want to discuss the first authentication, he said, and I'd rather do it somewhere private. The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Soho, all glass and steel and views that made Mia dizzy. The art on his walls here was different from the warehouse, no less impressive. A Basquiat dominated one wall. A small Picasso hung in his study. And in the dining room, positioned to catch the late afternoon light, was a painting Mia had only ever seen in textbooks. Is that a Klimt? She breathed. Portrait of a lady, acquired legally at auction 5 years ago. Derek handed her a glass of wine, something red and expensive that probably cost more than her monthly rent. It's my favorite piece in the legal collection. They had dinner at a table set for two, prepared by a chef whose name Mia recognized from a Michelin-starred restaurant downtown. The food was extraordinary, the wine even better, and the conversation flowed from art to music to books, like they'd been friends for years instead of uneasy partners for 8 weeks. Tell me about Giuseppe, Derek said over dessert. How did you end up working for him? Mia smiled, remembering. I was 22, fresh out of grad school, drowning in student loans and convinced I was going to have to take a job at an auction house doing grunt work for rich people who didn't know a Monet from a Manet. 4 hours asking me about authentication techniques, testing my knowledge, challenging my assumptions. And he offered you a job on the spot. He offered me an apprenticeship, said I had talent but needed refinement, spent the next 4 years teaching me everything he knew. When he retired, he left me the gallery because he said I was the only person he trusted to maintain its integrity. And now you're partnered with a criminal who wants you to help legitimize stolen art. Derek's smile was self-aware. He'd be horrified. He'd be pragmatic. Mia corrected. Dr. His. That provenance is often fiction. That legal ownership is whoever has the best documentation. He'd appreciate what we're trying to do, even if he'd question the methods. What we're trying to do, Derek repeated. So you're committed to this? To us? The way he said us made something flutter in Mia's chest. I'm committed to returning stolen art to where it belongs. If that means bending some rules about provenance, I can live with that. Spoken like someone who's been corrupted. But Derek was smiling, and there was approval in his eyes. After dinner, Derek showed her the piece he wanted authenticated first. It was in his study, covered by a cloth. When he removed the covering, Mia's breath caught. Oh my God, is that Raphael, Madonna of the Cherries, stolen from a private collection in Vienna in 1991, been missing ever since. Derek stepped back, giving her room to examine it. I need provenance that will stand up to scrutiny, the kind that would allow me to donate it anonymously to the Kunsthistorisches Museum, where it belongs. Mia moved closer, her authentication instincts taking over. She examined the brushwork, the pigments, the canvas preparation, pulled out her magnifying glass and her portable UV light. It was real, unquestionably, breathtakingly real. This is worth at least $20 million, she said, her voice hushed. And you want to give it away? I want to give it back. There's a difference. Derek moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Can you do it? Create provenance that would make this donation possible? I can try. It'll take time, research, careful documentation. We'll need to create a story about how it was discovered. Establish a paper trail that's plausible, but not too detailed. And we'll need to be patient. These things can take years to arrange properly. I have time, and I have resources to help with the research. Derek's hand came up to rest on her shoulder, a gesture that felt both casual and intimate. Thank you, Mia, for taking this seriously, for understanding what I'm trying to do. Mia turned to look at him, and suddenly they were very close. Close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Close enough to count the faint scars that marked his face. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. The truth, not the story you tell yourself. Derek was silent for a long moment, his hand still on her shoulder. Then, because I've spent 15 years taking things, building an empire on theft and violence and other people's losses, and I'm tired of it. I want to build something that gives back instead of just taking, something that matters more than money or power. And you think returning stolen art will redeem you? I think it's a start. His thumb brushed against her collarbone, a touch so light she might have imagined it. And I think doing it with you makes it mean something more. Mia knew she should step back, should maintain professional distance, should remember that this was a business arrangement, nothing more. Instead, she leaned in. The kiss was soft at first, questioning. Derek's hand slid from her shoulder to cup her jaw, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. Mia's hands found his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under expensive cotton. When they broke apart, both breathing harder, Derek rested his forehead against hers. That was a mistake, he said. But he didn't sound like he meant it. Probably, Mia agreed. We should keep things professional. We absolutely should. Neither of them moved. Stay tonight, Derek said. Not for this, not for us. Just stay. Let me show you the rest of the collection. Let us plan how we're going to return this Raphael. Let this be what it is. Two people who understand art working together on something important. Mia knew she should say no. Knew that staying would complicate everything. Blur lines that should stay sharp. Okay, she heard herself say. Show me what else you have. They spent the next 4 hours in Derek's study, going through his entire collection, both legal and stolen. He had documentation for everything, knew the provenance of each piece, could tell her the story of how it had been lost and how he'd acquired it. Somewhere around midnight, Mia realized she wasn't thinking about authentication or provenance or business anymore. She was just listening to Derek talk about art with a passion that matched her own, watching his hands move as he described brushwork and composition, seeing the way his eyes lit up when he explained why a particular piece mattered. This was who he really was, she realized. Not the criminal everyone feared or the businessman everyone courted, but someone who genuinely loved art for its own sake, who'd spent years acquiring pieces not to own them, but to save them. She fell asleep on his couch sometime after 2, exhausted and happy in a way she hadn't been in months. When she woke up, she was in Derek's bed, covered with a blanket that smelled like cedar and smoke. The sun was streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and she could hear movement in the kitchen. She should have panicked, should have been embarrassed or worried about what had happened. Instead, she felt peaceful. Derek appeared in the doorway with coffee, and something in Mia's chest settled into place. Good morning, he said. Sleep well? How did I get here? You fell asleep on the couch. I carried you. Nothing inappropriate happened, I promise. You were fully clothed the entire time. Mia took the coffee he offered and their fingers brushed. Thank you. For last night. For showing me all of that. Thank you for understanding. Derek sat on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain distance. I know this is complicated. The partnership, whatever's happening between us personally. But I meant what I said. I think we can do extraordinary things together. I think so too. They looked at each other for a long moment, and Mia knew that something had shifted between them. This wasn't just business anymore. It was something messier and more dangerous and infinitely more interesting. I should get to the gallery, she said, setting down the coffee. I have 3 authentications scheduled today. I'll have Marcus drive you. Derek. It's not about control, Mia. It's about making sure you're safe. Whoever broke into your gallery 2 months ago hasn't made another move, but that doesn't mean they've given up. His expression was serious. Let me protect you. At least until we know what we're dealing with. Mia nodded because he was right, and because part of her liked being protected by someone who could actually follow through on the threat. That should have worried her more than it did. The next 4 months were a blur of work and authentication, and gradually blurring lines between professional and personal. Mia and Derek worked together on creating provenance for the Raphael, a process that involved research trips to Vienna, careful documentation, and the creation of a paper trail that would pass muster with museum authentication boards. They also had dinner together 3 times a week, went to gallery openings as partners, spent long evenings in Derek's warehouse discussing which pieces could be legitimized and which would have to stay hidden. They didn't sleep together, though the tension was always there, simmering under every conversation. Mia's business flourished. Her reputation grew. She was invited to join authentication boards, to consult on major acquisitions, to lecture at Columbia about techniques she'd pioneered, all because of her association with Derek. And she tried not to think about the fact that she was falling for a man who'd built an empire on violence and theft, who had connections to organizations that killed people for looking at them wrong, who was using her expertise to legitimize art that should be in police evidence lockers. She tried and failed. "You're in love with him," Sophia said one night over wine. "Don't deny it. I can see it all over your face. It's complicated. It's dangerous. Mia, the FBI came to see me last week, asked questions about you, about the gallery, about your relationship with Derek." Mia's blood went cold. "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That you're brilliant and ethical and building a successful business. But they're building a case, Mia. They think Derek is using you to launder money or stolen art or something. And if they're right, you'll go down with him. He's not using me. We're partners. And you've checked every single piece you've authenticated for him? Made sure they're all legal? All clean?" Mia couldn't answer that. Because the truth was, she'd authenticated pieces she suspected had questionable provenance, had created documentation she knew was flexible with the truth, had bent rules she'd spent her entire career upholding. All for Derek. All because she trusted him when she probably shouldn't. "Be careful," Sophia said. "Whatever you think you're building with him, remember that men like Derek always have a plan, and that plan might not include your best interests." That night, Mia confronted Derek at his penthouse. "The FBI is asking questions about us, about the gallery, about whether you're using me for money laundering." Derek set down the wine he'd been about to pour. "I know. They've been investigating me for years. This is just their latest angle. And is it true? Are you using me?" "I'm using your expertise to legitimize art that deserves to be seen. We've discussed this. You knew what you were getting into. I knew I was taking risks. I didn't know the FBI was actively building a case that could destroy my career. Your career is better than it's ever been." Derek's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "You've authenticated pieces for the Met, for the Guggenheim, for private collectors who wouldn't have given you the time of day 6 months ago. That's not because of the FBI. That's because of our partnership. A partnership that could land me in prison. Only if we get caught. And we won't. Because we're careful." He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Mia, do you regret this? Working with me?" She should have said yes. Should have protected herself. Established distance. Saved what was left of her reputation. "No," she whispered. "I don't regret it." "Then trust me. I'll keep you safe. The FBI has nothing concrete. Just suspicion. They can investigate all they want, but they won't find evidence because we haven't left any." He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Mia let herself believe him. Let herself trust that he knew what he was doing, that he'd protect her, that everything would be okay. She was wrong, but she wouldn't realize that until it was far too late. The gala was Derek's idea. "A celebration of the Castellani Gallery's expansion," he said, showing Mia the plans. "We'll invite every major player in the New York art world. Show them what we've built together. Cement your reputation as one of the premier authentication experts on the East Coast." It was also, Mia suspected, a way for Derek to show off his association with legitimate art world figures, to demonstrate that he was part of their world now, not just the criminal fringes. The Celestial Ballroom was booked 6 months in advance, but Derek made a call, and suddenly they had the space for a Saturday in March. Invitations went out to 600 people, collectors, dealers, museum directors, critics, and every artist whose work Mia had ever authenticated. The response was overwhelming. Everyone accepted. They want to see what the infamous partnership looks like, Sophia said when she RSVP'd. Mia and Derek, the authentication prodigy and the reformed criminal. It's the art world's favorite redemption story. He's not reformed, Mia corrected. He's reforming. There's a difference. But even she had started to believe the story they were telling, that Derek was leaving his criminal past behind, that together they were building something legitimate and important. She'd authenticated the Raphael 6 weeks ago, and Derek had anonymously donated it to the Kunsthistorisches Museum with provenance that stood up to their rigorous examination. The museum had announced the discovery with fanfare, calling it one of the most significant returns of stolen art in decades. No one connected it to Derek. No one questioned the provenance Mia had carefully constructed. It felt like a victory. Like maybe they really could pull this off? Return stolen art, build legitimate businesses, create something meaningful together. Mia should have known better. The night of the gala, she wore the red Valentino dress that Derek had bought her over her protests. It fit perfectly, made her look sophisticated and powerful, and exactly like someone who belonged at the center of New York's art world. Derek picked her up at her apartment in a car that probably cost more than the building. "You look stunning," he said, and the way he looked at her made Mia's breath catch. "So do you." They'd been doing this dance for 6 months now, working together, having dinner together, spending hours in each other's company. But they hadn't slept together, hadn't crossed that final line that would make this relationship undeniably personal instead of professionally complicated. "After tonight," Derek said as they drove to the ballroom, "everything changes. We'll have legitimacy that can't be questioned, connections that will take us anywhere we want to go. The FBI will have to back off because we'll be too visible, too connected to touch. Or they'll come after us harder because we've made ourselves targets." Always so pessimistic. But Derek was smiling. "Trust me, Mia. This is going to work." The celestial ballroom was spectacular. Chandeliers dripped crystal light across marble floors. The Castellani collection was displayed on specially constructed walls, each piece lit to perfection. Servers in black and white circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked like tiny works of art. 600 people filled the space, and every single one of them wanted to congratulate Mia on her success. She lost count of how many hands she shook, how many conversations she had about authentication techniques or recent acquisitions or the Raphael donation that everyone was still talking about. Derek was always nearby, never touching her but close enough that everyone knew they were together. His hand at the small of her back when they moved through the crowd. His body between her and anyone who got too close. His eyes constantly scanning the room like he was expecting trouble. At midnight, Mia excused herself to the bathroom, needing a moment away from the noise and the people and the performance of being successful. That's when she found the documents. They were in her clutch. The vintage Judith Lieber she'd brought because Derek had said it matched her dress perfectly. Folded papers that hadn't been there when she'd left her apartment. She unfolded them with shaking hands. Authentication certificates in her name, with her signature and seal, for paintings she'd never seen. Bills of sale for artwork she'd never handled. Transaction records showing money moving through accounts she didn't recognize. All of it linking her to art theft, money laundering, and fraud. All of it false. And all of it in her handwriting, with her signature, bearing her professional seal. Someone had forged her credentials, created a trail of evidence that would destroy her reputation and probably land her in prison. The question was who and why. Mia's hands were still shaking when she returned to the ballroom. She scanned the crowd for Derek, found him in conversation with District Attorney Morrison and Senator Williams. When he saw her face, he excused himself immediately. "What's wrong?" "Not here." Mia's voice was tight. "We need to talk. Privately." They found a small room off the main ballroom, used for coat storage during events. Mia showed him the documents. watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding, to something that looked like rage. "Someone planted these in your bag," he said, studying the papers. "Someone who wants to implicate you in crimes you didn't commit. Or someone who wants to expose crimes I did commit." Mia's voice was sharp. "Derek, these forgeries are good enough to fool experts. Which means whoever made them has access to my seal, my signature, my authentication documents. Who has that kind of access?" Derek was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then, "The FBI." "What?" "They've been investigating me for months. If they couldn't find evidence of money to create it, plant forged documents that implicate you, then offer you a deal if you testify against me." It made horrible, perfect sense. "So what do I do?" "You go back out there," Derek said. "You smile and accept congratulations and act like nothing is wrong. And tomorrow, we contact our lawyers and figure out who's behind this and how to protect you." "Derek, I won't let them use you to get to me, I promise." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "Whatever happens, I'll keep you safe." Mia wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he could protect her from federal prosecution and forged evidence and everything that was about to come crashing down. But looking at the documents in her hand, at the perfect forgeries of her signature and seal, she knew that someone had been planning this for a long time, and that someone knew exactly what they were doing. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. So am I." Derek kissed her forehead, gentle and reassuring. "But we'll get through this together. I promise." They returned to the gala, and Mia did exactly what Derek had told her to do. She smiled, accepted congratulations, acted like nothing was wrong. And all the while, the forged documents burned in her clutch like evidence of crimes she'd never committed but could never disprove. At 2 a.m., when the last guests had finally left, Mia stood in the center of the empty ballroom with Derek beside her. "That was exhausting," she said, "but successful. Everyone who matters now knows that the Castellani Gallery is a force in the art world, that you're someone to be taken seriously." "Right. Until the FBI arrests me for crimes documented in my own handwriting." Derek pulled her close, and for the first time all night, Mia let herself lean against him. Let herself take comfort in his presence, even though she knew he was part of the problem. "We'll figure this out," he said into her hair. "I'll call my lawyers first thing tomorrow. We'll find out who planted those documents and why, and we'll make sure you're protected. And if we can't, then we run. Disappear. Start over somewhere the FBI can't touch us." He said it like it was an option, like they could just abandon everything they'd built and start fresh. Maybe they could. But Mia didn't want to run. She wanted to fight. She wanted to find whoever had forged her documents and make them pay. And she wanted to understand why Derek seemed so calm about all of this. Like he'd been expecting something to go wrong. Like maybe he'd been planning for it. "Take me home," she said, pulling away. "I need to sleep before I can think about any of this." Derek's driver took her back to her apartment, with Marcus following in a second car to make sure she got inside safely. Mia lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together what had happened. Someone had planted forged documents in her bag. Someone with access to her seal, her signature, her authentication methods. Someone who wanted to implicate her in crimes she hadn't committed. Or had she? Mia thought about the Raphael, the provenance she'd created that was flexible with the truth. Thought about other pieces she'd authenticated for Derek. Pieces with questionable ownership that she'd legitimized through careful documentation. She'd bent rules. She'd created provenance that was more fiction than fact. She'd helped Derek launder stolen art into legitimate collections. Maybe these forged documents weren't so different from what she'd already been doing. Maybe someone was just exposing the truth she'd been hiding from herself. That thought kept her awake until dawn. The next morning, Mia went to the gallery early before Marcus could arrive to stand guard. She needed to be alone, needed to think without Derek's security team watching her every move. She was examining the Castellani collection, all 15 paintings still safe, still exactly where they belonged, when someone knocked on the gallery door. Through the glass, she could see a woman in a dark suit. FBI, Mia knew immediately. Something about the way she stood screamed federal agent. Mia considered not answering, considered calling Derek, calling a lawyer, protecting herself. Instead, she opened the door. Mia, the woman said. I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. I need to talk to you about Derek. I'm not answering questions without my lawyer present. I'm not here to interrogate you. Agent Chen held up her hands, showing she wasn't armed, wasn't a threat. I'm here to warn you. Derek isn't who you think he is. I know exactly who he is. Do you? Do you know that he's been under investigation for 15 years? That we have evidence linking him to art theft, money laundering, and at least 3 murders? That everything he's built with you is part of a larger plan to legitimize his empire and destroy the evidence against him? Mia's stomach dropped. I don't believe you. You don't have to believe me, but you should look at this. Agent Chen pulled a tablet from her bag, pulled up a series of photos. This is from 3 nights ago. Derek meeting with known members of the Russo crime family, discussing their next acquisition. The photos showed Derek in what looked like a warehouse, surrounded by men in suits. The same warehouse where he kept his private collection, Mia realized. The stolen art he'd shown her on their 3rd date. Art theft is their primary source of income, Agent Chen continued. They steal pieces from private collections, sell them to people like Derek, who then use your authentication to legitimize them. You're not reforming him, Mia. You're helping him expand his criminal empire. That's not true. We're returning stolen art to museums. The Raphael donation was a test to see if your provenance would stand up to scrutiny. It did. Which means Derek now knows he can use you to legitimize anything, including pieces he's planning to steal in the next 6 months. Pieces worth over $100 million combined. Mia felt like she was drowning. Why are you telling me this? Because we need your help. Testify against Derek. Give us the evidence we need to shut down his operation, and we'll protect you. Full immunity. Witness protection, if necessary. You can walk away from this with your reputation intact. And if I don't? Then when we arrest Derek, and we will arrest him, you'll go down with him. Every piece you authenticated, every provenance you created, every document you signed will be evidence of your complicity. You'll spend the next 20 years in federal prison. Agent Chen set her business card on the counter. You have 48 hours to decide. After that, the offer disappears, and you become a co-defendant instead of a witness. She left, and Mia stood in her gallery, surrounded by Giuseppe's collection, trying to process what she'd just been told. Was Derek using her? Had everything, the partnership, the dinners, the almost romance, been part of a plan to legitimize his criminal empire? Or was the FBI lying, trying to turn her against him so they could build their case? Mia had no way to know. She picked up Agent Chen's card, looked at it for a long time. Then she called Derek. We need to talk. Right now. And I need the truth about everything. Derek arrived at the gallery within 20 minutes, which told Mia he'd been nearby, waiting, like he'd known the FBI would make their move. Tell me everything, Mia demanded the moment he walked through the door. No more half-truths or careful omissions. I want to know exactly who you are and what I've gotten myself into. Derek looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he walked to the door, locked it, and flipped the sign to closed. All right. The truth. He moved to stand in front of the Castellani collection, his hands in his pockets, his posture deceptively casual. My real name is Derek Russo. I'm the head of the Russo crime family, which controls art theft, smuggling, and black market antiquities across the eastern seaboard. I've been running the organization since I was 23, when my father was killed by a rival family. Mia's breath caught, but she didn't interrupt. Everything the FBI told you is true. I've been involved in art theft for 15 years. I have connections to murders, though I've never killed anyone personally. And yes, I've been using you to legitimize stolen art. The words should have devastated her. Instead, Mia felt strangely calm, like she'd known this was coming, had been preparing for it even while she'd been falling for him. But, Derek continued, turning to face her, what the FBI doesn't know, what no one knows, is why. Why you're a criminal. Usually it's money or power or why I showed you my collection that first night. Why I offered you the partnership. Why I've spent 6 months carefully positioning you as my associate in front of everyone who matters in the art world. His eyes were intense, locked on hers. Why I needed you to fall for me. Just a little bit. Enough to trust me when everything fell apart. Mia's heart was hammering now. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that the Russo family has been under FBI investigation for 3 years. They have evidence, witnesses, documentation. In 6 months, maybe less, they're going to arrest me and everyone in my organization. And when that happens, everything I've built will be seized by the government. He pulled out his phone, showed her a series of documents. Federal seizure orders, asset freezes, warrants that were already drafted, just waiting for the final pieces of evidence. The collection in my warehouse? Worth over $300 million. All of it will go to the FBI, be tied up in evidence for decades, eventually sold at auction to the highest bidder. Museums won't get it. Scholars won't get to study it. It'll just disappear into private collections again, and the cycle will continue. So you're using me to… what? Hide the art somewhere the FBI can't find it? I'm using you to legitimize it before they can seize it. Derek's voice was urgent now, passionate. Every piece you've authenticated, every provenance you've created, makes that art harder to classify as stolen goods. The Raphael we returned to Vienna? That was a test. To see if your documentation would stand up to scrutiny. It did. So, now you want me to do the same for the rest of your collection. Create provenance for $300 million worth of stolen art before the FBI arrests you. No. Derek moved closer, his hands coming up to frame her face. I want you to help me return it. All of it. To museums, to private collections it was stolen from, to the places where it belongs, before the FBI can seize it and lock it away forever. Mia stared at him. You're planning to give away your entire collection? I'm planning to make sure it ends up somewhere meaningful instead of in an FBI evidence locker. But I can't do it alone. I need your authentication, your reputation, your connections. I need the Castellani Gallery to be the conduit through which this art gets returned to the world. Why? The question came out as a whisper. Why give it all away? You've spent 15 years building this collection. Because I'm tired, Mia. Tired of looking at masterpieces I can never share. Tired of running an organization built on theft and violence. Tired of being the villain when I could be something else. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. And because I met you. And you made me want to be better than I am. Mia wanted to believe him. Wanted to think that 6 months of partnership and almost romance had been real, not manipulation. The FBI said you're planning to steal more art. Over $100 million worth in the next 6 months. The FBI is right. But not because I want to expand my collection. Derek released her, pulled up more files on his phone. These are pieces that are about to be sold to private collectors who will hide them away forever. Middle Eastern oil magnates, Russian oligarchs, tech billionaires who buy art as investment vehicles. If I don't acquire them now, they'll disappear into vaults and never be seen again. He showed her images. A Vermeer about to be sold to a Saudi prince, a Caravaggio being purchased by a Russian businessman with ties to the Kremlin, a collection of Renaissance drawings that a Silicon Valley CEO was buying as tax shelters. I'm going to steal them before those sales go through. And then, with your help, I'm going to return them to museums where they belong. The Vermeer to the Rijksmuseum, the Caravaggio to the Borghese Gallery in Rome, the drawings to the Uffizi. That's insane. You're talking about stealing art so you can give it away. I'm talking about making sure masterpieces end up in public collections instead of private vaults. And yes, it's insane. But it's also the only way to make sure this art survives my arrest and the FBI seizure. Mia pulled away from him, needing space to think. So what's my role in all of this? You authenticate the pieces, I create provenance, and then you anonymously donate them to museums? Exactly. But there's a complication. Of course there is. The FBI knows I've been working with you. They suspect you're helping me launder stolen art, which means when they arrest me, they'll come after you too. Unless, unless I testify against you. Turn witness, give them what they need for their case, and walk away with immunity. Right. Derek's expression was unreadable. Which is why I need you to do exactly that. Mia felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. What? I need you to work with the FBI. Give them evidence against me. Help them build their case. And when they arrest me, I need you to testify that I manipulated you, used you, made you complicit in crimes you didn't understand. But that's not. It doesn't matter if it's true. It matters if it's believable. And it will be, because by the time we're done, everyone will believe that I used you, corrupted you, and you were brave enough to come forward when you realized what was happening. Mia stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. You want me to betray you, publicly, send you to prison. I want you to survive what's coming. I want the art to end up where it belongs. And I want you to be the hero who helped return stolen masterpieces to the world, instead of the criminal who helped me steal them. You've been planning this from the beginning. The partnership, the gala, everything. You've been setting me up to turn witness against you. I've been setting us both up, Derek corrected. This is a controlled demolition, Mia. My empire is going to fall either way. The only question is whether it falls into FBI evidence lockers or into museums. Whether you go down with me or come out of this as the whistleblower who exposed the Russo family's art theft operation. I don't understand. If you're planning to give away all the art anyway, why do you need me to betray you? Because the FBI won't accept anonymous donations of stolen art. They'll seize it, investigate it, tie it up in legal proceedings for decades. But if you come forward as a witness, if you help them recover pieces, if you work with museums to authenticate and return art as part of a plea agreement, then it all becomes official recovery instead of criminal evidence. Derek pulled out a folder thick with documents. This is everything. Every piece in my collection, every planned theft, every bit of evidence the FBI will need to convict me. I'm giving it to you. And in 48 hours, I need you to give it to Agent Chen. Mia's hand shook as she took the folder. You're asking me to destroy you. I'm asking you to save the art. And yourself. His voice was gentle now. Mia, I knew from the moment I met you that this was how it would end. I'm a criminal. Eventually, I was always going to get caught. But I can choose how it happens. And I can choose what survives when I'm gone. You're choosing the art over yourself. I'm choosing you over myself. If you go down with me, if you end up in prison because of our partnership, then everything we've done means nothing. But if you come out of this clean, if you become known as the expert who helped recover hundreds of millions in stolen art, then you can continue the work. You can make sure other pieces get returned, other collections get legitimized. Mia opened the folder, saw authentication certificates and theft reports, and evidence that would put Derek in prison for the rest of his life. I can't do this. I can't betray you. You're not betraying me. You're playing your part in the plan. Derek moved closer, his hand finding hers. Everything that happens from here is choreographed, Mia. The FBI raid, the arrest, the trial. You testifying against me. All of it designed to make sure you survive, and the art gets returned. And you just go to prison for 20 years? I go to prison knowing that I did something meaningful with the empire I built, that instead of dying as a thief, I'll be remembered as someone who gave back more than he took. Mia looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth in his eyes. This wasn't manipulation or a con. This was a man who'd spent 6 months falling for her while planning his own destruction, all so she could survive what was coming. You're an idiot, she whispered. Probably. His smile was sad. But I'm an idiot who loves you, and I want you to have the career you deserve, the life you should have, even if I can't be part of it. Derek? No. He kissed her, soft and brief. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Take the folder. Work with Agent Chen. Help them build their case. And when the time comes, you testify that I used you, manipulated you, made you think you were doing legitimate work when really you were helping me launder stolen art. That's a lie. It's the story that saves you. That's all that matters. Mia clutched the folder to her chest, tears streaming down her face. I hate you for this. For making me care about you when you were always planning to leave. I know. I'm sorry. Derek wiped away her tears with his thumbs. But in 6 months, when you're authenticating recovered art for the Louvre or the Prado, when you're helping museums reclaim pieces that were stolen decades ago, you'll understand why it had to be this way. I'll never forgive you. Good. That'll make the testimony more convincing. He left then, and Mia stood in her gallery surrounded by Giuseppe's collection, holding evidence that would destroy the man she'd fallen in love with. She should have refused. Should have thrown the folder in the trash. Called Derek back. Found another way. Instead, she opened it and started reading. And 2 days later, when Agent Chen came back to the gallery, Mia handed over every piece of evidence Derek had given her. I want full immunity, she said, and I want to work with museums to return every piece of art Derek stole. I'll testify. I'll cooperate. I'll do whatever you need. But the art goes to museums, not evidence lockers. Agent Chen smiled like she'd won the lottery. Deal. The FBI raid on Derek's warehouse happened on a Thursday morning at 6 a.m. Mia was there, wearing a wire, watching from a surveillance van as federal agents swarmed the building. She'd helped them plan the raid, told them where the art was stored, how many security personnel Derek had, what kind of resistance to expect. She'd betrayed him completely, and Derek had let her. When they brought him out in handcuffs, he looked directly at the surveillance van, looked at Mia through the tinted windows like he could see her, and he smiled. That smile haunted her for weeks. The arrest made national news. Art theft ring busted, the headlines proclaimed. FBI recovers stolen masterpieces worth hundreds of millions. And Mia was the hero. The brave authentication expert who discovered she was working for a criminal and had come forward to help the FBI recover stolen art. Her phone rang constantly, museums wanting her expertise, collectors offering her jobs, universities inviting her to lecture. The Castellani Gallery became famous overnight. Not as Derek's partner, but as the place where the FBI's star witness worked, where authentication met justice, where stolen art went to be identified and returned home. Giuseppe would have been proud, Mia thought bitterly, or horrified. She wasn't sure which. The trial was scheduled for 6 months away. Derek's lawyers tried to get him bail, but the prosecution, led by Agent Chen, argued he was a flight risk. He stayed in federal custody. Mia visited him once, 2 weeks after his arrest. They sat across from each other in a visitor's room, separated by plexiglass, speaking through phones that were definitely monitored. How are you? Derek asked, like they were old friends catching up over coffee. Busy. I'm working with the Louvre on the Vermeer authentication, and the Prado wants me to consult on the Caravaggio provenance. Good. That's good. He looked thinner, tired, but his eyes were bright. The art's going where it belongs? Every piece. Exactly like you planned. Mia's voice cracked. I hate you for this. I know. But you're brilliant at it. The Louvre director called the Vermeer authentication the most thorough he's ever seen. You're going to change how museums handle recovered art. I don't care about any of that. I care that you're in here, and I'm the reason why. You're the reason the art is being returned instead of sitting in evidence. You're the reason museums are getting their stolen pieces back. That's worth more than my freedom. Not to me. Derek leaned forward, his hand pressed against the plexiglass. Mia, listen to me. In 4 months, I'm going to plead guilty. My lawyers will arrange a deal. 15 years? Eligible for parole in 10. And you're going to testify at my sentencing hearing about how I manipulated you, used your expertise, corrupted your ethics. I know the plan, Derek. And you're going to mean every word. Because by then, you'll have authenticated enough recovered art, worked with enough museums, seen enough pieces returned home that you'll understand what we accomplished together. You'll see the bigger picture. The bigger picture where you're in prison for 15 years? The bigger picture where hundreds of masterpieces get returned to the world instead of staying hidden or destroyed, where your career flourishes instead of ending, where we both become something better than we were. Mia wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that she'd trade all of it for him to be free. But looking at him through the plexiglass, seeing the peace in his eyes, she realized he didn't want to be free. He wanted exactly what was happening. He wanted to be punished for 15 years of theft. He wanted the art to be returned. And he wanted her to have the career she deserved, even if it meant losing everything else. I have to go, she said, standing up. The Met wants me to authenticate a Rembrandt they think might be from your collection. It is. Storage unit in Brooklyn. Combination is in the evidence file. Derek stood too. Mia, thank you. For doing this. For being strong enough to play the part I needed you to play. Don't thank me for destroying you. Thank you for surviving. Mia left the prison and cried the entire drive back to Manhattan. The months before the trial were a blur of authentications and museum consultations and testimony preparation. Mia worked with 17 different museums, across 3 continents, helping them authenticate and reclaim pieces from Derek's collection. The Vermeer went to the Rijksmuseum with provenance so thoroughly documented that it was held up as the gold standard for art recovery. The Caravaggio went to the Borghese Gallery in Rome, returning home after 30 years. A collection of Renaissance drawings went to the Uffizi, filling gaps in their collection that scholars had mourned for decades. Every piece Derek had stolen, every masterpiece he'd hidden in his warehouse, went to museums where the public could see them, where scholars could study them, where they belonged. And Mia was credited with making it all possible. Her testimony in Derek's trial was everything his lawyers had asked for. She described how he'd approached her, how he'd gained her trust, how he'd gradually involved her in authentication work that she hadn't realized was for stolen art. She cried on the stand, real tears, because even though she knew this was the plan, it hurt to say these things about him in public. Derek watched her testify with an expression that never changed, calm, accepting, almost proud. When the prosecutor asked if she'd known the art was stolen, Mia said no. When they asked if Derek had manipulated her, she said yes. All lies, all necessary. The jury convicted him on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in federal prison, eligible for parole in 10 with good behavior. Derek was 42 years old. He'd be 52 when he got out, if he got out. An entire decade of his life gone. Because of Mia. Because he'd loved her enough to sacrifice himself so she could survive. 2 years after Derek's conviction, Mia received a letter. It came to the gallery, addressed in handwriting she recognized immediately. Derek's bold script, somehow elegant despite being written with prison commissary pens. Mia, by now you've probably realized what really happened that night at the Celestial Ballroom. But in case you haven't, let me explain. The documents you found in your clutch, the forged authentication certificates, the false bills of sale, I put them there. Not to frame you, to force your hand. I knew the FBI was getting close. I knew they'd approach you, try to flip you against me. And I knew you'd never betray me willingly, no matter how much danger you were in. So I created a situation where you'd have no choice. Forged documents that implicated you in my crimes. Evidence that would destroy your career and land you in prison. And then I gave you a way out. Cooperate with the FBI. Testify against me. Save yourself. You were always going to do the right thing, Mia. You're too ethical, too principled to let yourself go down for crimes you didn't commit. I was counting on that. Everything that happened after that night was choreographed. My arrest, your testimony, the trial. All of it designed to accomplish 3 things. First, to get the art into museums where it belongs. Every piece. You've authenticated and returned was planned months in advance. The museums we chose, the provenance we created, all of it carefully orchestrated to make sure the art ended up in the right hands. Second, to destroy the Russo family's art theft operation permanently, with me in prison and the FBI having seized all our contacts and records, the organization is finished. No more stolen art, no more black market antiquities. The cycle is broken. Third, and most important, to make sure you survived with your reputation intact. Better than intact, enhanced. You're now one of the most respected authentication experts in the world. Museums compete for your consultation. Your career is exactly what it should have been. What it would have been if I'd never entered your life and complicated everything. The humiliation at the gala, you throwing that drink, exposing me in front of everyone who mattered, that was the final piece. It established you as someone who stood up to me, who refused to be my accomplice, who had the courage to burn down our partnership publicly when you realized what I really was. Everyone believes you're the victim I corrupted and the hero who came forward. No one will ever question your ethics or your authenticity again. That was always the plan, Mia. From the moment I saw you in your gallery, examining that Vermeer forgery with such intense focus, I knew you were the one who could help me do this. Not just authenticate the art, but give it legitimacy that would last beyond my arrest. I needed someone brilliant and ethical and brave enough to turn against me when the time came. I needed you. And yes, I fell in love with you along the way. That wasn't part of the plan. That complicated everything and made this so much harder than it should have been. But it also made it more meaningful. Because now you're not just the expert who helped recover stolen art. You're the woman I loved enough to sacrifice everything for. That's the story that will follow you forever. The authentication specialist who fell for a criminal and was brave enough to bring him to justice when she discovered the truth. It's a good story. Better than the truth, which is that you were complicit from the beginning, that we planned the returns together, that you knew exactly what you were doing every step of the way. The truth would destroy your career. The story I created for you will make you legendary. I hope you can forgive me someday. For manipulating you. For putting you through the trauma of testifying against me. For loving you and leaving you anyway. But even if you never forgive me, know that I meant every word I said. You're extraordinary, Mia. And you deserved better than a partnership with a criminal. Now you have better. A career built on legitimate work. A reputation that's unassailable. A life that isn't tangled up with mine. That was always what I wanted for you. The art is where it belongs. You're where you belong. And I'm exactly where I deserve to be. DPS. There's one more piece. A small Vermeer. Girl reading a letter. It's in a storage unit in Queens. The combination is your birthday. I've been saving it for you. Not to authenticate or return, just to keep. Something beautiful that belongs to you, that you can look at and remember that once, for a little while, someone loved you enough to give you the world. Mia read the letter 3 times, standing in her office with tears streaming down her face. He'd planned everything, the forged documents, the confrontation with Agent Chen, her testimony, all of it designed to save her while destroying himself. And she'd played her part perfectly, never realizing she was in a play he'd written specifically for her. She should have been angry, should have felt manipulated, used, betrayed. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Loved, protected, cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. Derek had orchestrated his own destruction to make sure she survived. Had spent 6 months falling in love with her while planning to break both their hearts, all so she could have the career she deserved. That was either the most romantic thing anyone had ever done, or the most manipulative. Mia suspected it was both. She went to Queens that afternoon, found the storage unit, entered her birthday as the combination. Inside was a single painting, carefully wrapped and stored in climate-controlled darkness. Girl Reading a Letter by Johannes Vermeer. one of the master's smallest works, painted around 1657, and missing since it had been stolen from a private collection in Brussels in 1995, worth approximately $40 million, and Derek had given it to her, not to authenticate, not to return to a museum, not to sell or display, just to keep. A masterpiece that belonged to her, that she could look at and remember him. Mia stood in that storage unit for an hour, looking at the painting, the girl's face, caught in that perfect moment of reading something that mattered. The light falling across her features with that impossible luminosity only Vermeer could achieve. She thought about Derek in prison, serving time for crimes he'd committed so he could return art to the world. Thought about her career, built on his manipulation and sacrifice. Thought about the fact that she was holding a stolen Vermeer, and the only person who knew it existed was serving 15 years in federal prison. She should return it. Should contact Agent Chen, add it to the recovery list, send it to Brussels where it belonged. Instead, she took it home, hung it in her bedroom where only she could see it. And every night she looked at that girl reading her letter and wondered what the message said. Wondered if it was anything like the letter Derek had sent her. A confession wrapped in an apology, wrapped in a love letter that destroyed everything it touched. 3 years after Derek's conviction, Mia finally understood what had really happened that night at the Celestial Ballroom. She was working late at the gallery, going through old files for a new authentication project, when she found the security footage. It was from the coat room where she and Derek had talked after she'd found the forged documents. The footage she'd thought had been erased, that no one would ever see. But Derek had kept a copy, and he'd sent it to her, labeled simply, "The Truth." Mia watched herself on the screen, panicked and shaking, showing Derek the forged documents. Watched him study them, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. But what she saw now, 3 years later, with perspective and distance, was something she'd missed in the moment. He wasn't surprised. He was checking to make sure everything had gone according to plan. The documents were supposed to be discovered that night, at that gala, in front of everyone who mattered, because that's when Mia would be most vulnerable, most likely to panic, most likely to do exactly what Derek needed her to do: confront the FBI, take the deal, testify against him. Every moment had been choreographed. The footage continued. Mia watched Derek pull her into his arms, watched herself lean against him, crying, watched him whisper things she couldn't hear through the security camera's audio. But she remembered what he'd said. "I won't let them use you to get to me. I promise. Whatever happens, I'll keep you safe." At the time, she'd thought he meant he'd protect her from the FBI. Now she realized he'd meant he'd protect her from himself, from the consequences of their partnership, from prison, from the destruction of her career. He'd protect her by making himself the villain, by taking all the blame, by creating a narrative where she was the victim instead of his accomplice. The footage jumped ahead, to the moment later that night when Mia had left the gala, when the ballroom had emptied and only Derek remained. She watched him stand there alone, looking at the spot where she'd thrown champagne at him, where she'd accused him in front of 600 witnesses. And she watched him smile. Not a cruel smile, not a satisfied smile, a sad smile. A smile that said he'd done exactly what he'd set out to do, and it had cost him everything, and it was worth it. The footage ended. Mia sat in her office staring at the blank screen, and finally, understood the full scope of what Derek had done. He'd planned her humiliation of him, had wanted her to throw that drink, to expose him publicly, to turn everyone against him. Because that's what would make the FBI believe she was genuine. That's what would make her testimony credible. That's what would save her reputation. The humiliation wasn't something that had happened to him. It was something he'd orchestrated for her. The title of their story, the one everyone told about them, was "The Authentication Expert Who Exposed Her Criminal Partner." But the real title, the one only Derek knew, was "The Criminal Who Let Himself Be Exposed So She Could Survive." And it had worked perfectly. Mia was now one of the most respected authentication experts in the world. Her career had flourished. Museums competed for her consultation. Students studied her techniques, all because Derek had let her destroy him. She picked up her phone and called the prison. It took 20 minutes to get through, but finally she heard his voice. Mia, is everything all right? I found the footage, from the coat room, from the ballroom. Silence on the other end. Then, ah, you planned all of it. The confrontation, the humiliation. You wanted me to throw that drink at you in front of everyone. Yes. Why? Because you needed to be visibly, publicly angry at me. You needed witnesses who could testify that you'd turned against me before the FBI raid. It had to be real, Mia. It had to be something no one could question. So you made me humiliate you. In front of everyone who mattered. You let me destroy your reputation. My reputation was always going to be destroyed. I'm a criminal, Mia. I've been one for 15 years. But your reputation, that was worth protecting. That was worth everything. Mia's throat was tight. I thought I was exposing you. I thought I was being brave, standing up to you. But really, I was just playing my part in your script. You were brave, braver than you know. Because even though I'd set everything up, you still had to make the choice. You had to decide to throw that drink, to say those words, to turn against me. I gave you the situation, but you gave it power by meaning it. I did mean it. In that moment, I hated you. I know. That's what made it perfect. Mia looked at the Vermeer on her wall, the girl reading her letter, preserved in that perfect moment of discovery. There's something I need to tell you. I'm listening. At the gala, when I found those forged documents, when I confronted you, I knew. Not consciously, but somewhere deep down, I knew you'd put them there. I knew this was all part of some larger plan, and I chose to go along with it anyway. Mia, no, let me finish. You think you manipulated me, controlled the situation, made me dance like a puppet. But I chose to dance, Derek. I chose to confront you. I chose to work with the FBI. I chose to testify. Not because you forced me, but because I understood what you were trying to do, and I wanted to help you do it. Silence. Then. Why? Because you were right. The art deserved to be in museums. I deserved a career that wasn't built on stolen goods. And you deserved to pay for what you'd done, even if what you'd done was steal masterpieces to save them. So we were both playing parts we knew were scripted. We were both choosing to do something meaningful, even if it destroyed us in the process. Mia wiped away tears. I forgive you, Derek. For the manipulation, for the plan, for loving me and leaving me anyway. I forgive all of it. Thank you. His voice was rough, with emotion. That means more than you know. But I need you to forgive me too. For what? For keeping the Vermeer. For not returning it to Brussels. For being just corrupt enough to accept a gift from a criminal. Derek laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound Mia had heard in 3 years. I gave you that painting because I wanted you to have something beautiful that no one could take away. Something that reminded you that you're not as purely ethical as everyone thinks you are. That you're complicated and human and capable of bending rules when it matters. It hangs in my bedroom. I look at it every night. Good. That's exactly what I wanted. They were both quiet for a moment, and Mia could hear the prison sounds in the background. Guards calling out, doors slamming, the mechanical noises of institutional life. This was where Derek would be for 7 more years. Minimum. Because of her testimony. Because of the plan he'd orchestrated. Because of their partnership that had started with authentication and ended with mutual destruction. I'm doing good work, Mia said finally. The Prado just asked me to consult on their entire Renaissance collection. I'm helping 3 museums authenticate pieces that might be from your old contacts. I'm teaching a course at Columbia on art recovery and authentication ethics. I heard. You're becoming everything I knew you could be. Because you destroyed yourself to make it possible. Because we both chose to do something that mattered more than our own happiness. That's not destruction, Mia. That's sacrifice. And it was worth it. A guard's voice came through the line telling Derek his time was up. I have to go, he said. I know. Derek. One more thing. Yes? The girl in the Vermeer. The one reading the letter. What do you think it says? Derek was quiet for so long Mia thought they'd been disconnected. Then, I think it says exactly what my letter said to you. That someone loved her enough to give her everything, even if it meant losing her. That she's extraordinary and deserves the world. And that he'd do it all again, even knowing how it would end. The call disconnected. Mia sat in her office, surrounded by Giuseppe's collection, and cried. Not tears of sadness or regret, tears of understanding. Finally, after 3 years, she understood the full scope of what they'd accomplished together. They'd returned over $300 million in stolen art to museums around the world. They'd destroyed one of the largest art theft operations on the East Coast. They'd created a new model for art recovery that museums were still using. And they'd loved each other enough to sacrifice everything: reputation, freedom, happiness, to make it all possible. That night at the Celestial Ballroom, when Mia had thrown champagne in Derek's face and accused him of using her, everyone had seen humiliation, but really it had been the beginning of the most successful art recovery operation in modern history. A operation planned by a criminal who wanted redemption, executed by an authentication expert who wanted justice, and powered by a love that was complicated enough to survive prison sentences and testimony, and $300 million in recovered masterpieces. 7 years later, when Derek was released on parole, Mia was waiting outside the prison. She'd brought the Vermeer. Girl reading a letter, wrapped carefully in archival materials, ready for its journey home to Brussels. Derek looked older, gray at the temples, lines around his eyes, but his smile when he saw her was exactly the same. You're returning it, he said, looking at the wrapped painting. We're returning it. Together. With provenance, we create that's true this time. No forgery, no manipulation. Just two people who found a stolen masterpiece and want to send it home. After keeping it for 7 years. After keeping it as a reminder of what we did together. What we're capable of when we choose meaning over safety. Mia held out her hand. Partners? Derek took it, and his hand was warm and scarred and familiar. Partners, he agreed. They returned the Vermeer to Brussels together, created provenance that was honest about its recovery, found in private storage, held by someone who wished to remain anonymous, authenticated by Mia's gallery. The museum asked no questions. They were too grateful to have the painting back. And Mia and Derek stood in the gallery where it was displayed, looking at that girl reading her letter, surrounded by visitors who had no idea what sacrifices had been made to bring this painting home. Worth it? Mia asked quietly. Every second, Derek replied. They left the museum hand in hand, two people who'd destroyed each other and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Two people who'd planned a humiliation that became a recovery operation. Two people who'd loved each other enough to sacrifice everything, and who'd somehow found their way back to each other anyway. The story everyone told about them was about exposure and betrayal and justice. But the real story, the one they knew, was about sacrifice and love and art that deserved to be saved. And it was better than any masterpiece they'd ever authenticated. The Castellani Gallery had expanded to take up an entire building in Chelsea, 3 floors of exhibition space dedicated to authentication, recovery, and the ethical treatment of art. Mia ran it with Derek as her partner, officially this time, legally, with contracts and everything. They'd recovered and returned over $2 billion in stolen art in the decade since Derek's release. Their authentication methods had become industry standard. Museums around the world sought their consultation, and they'd gotten married 5 years ago in a quiet ceremony at the gallery with only Giuseppe's collection as witnesses. Tonight, they were hosting a gala, a celebration of their work, their partnership, their legacy. 600 guests filled the space, including many of the same people who'd been at the Celestial Ballroom that night 10 years ago. The night Mia had thrown champagne in Derek's face, the night everything had changed. Nervous? Derek asked. straightening his tie. Terrified, Mia admitted. What if someone realizes what really happened? What if the truth comes out? Then we tell them. We tell them that sometimes the only way to save something beautiful is to destroy everything else. That love requires sacrifice. That the best plans are the ones where everyone gets what they need, even if they don't get what they want. Mia looked around the gallery, at the art they'd recovered, at the career they'd built, at the life they'd created together from the ashes of Derek's empire. No regrets? She asked. Derek pulled her close, his hand warm at the small of her back. Not a single one. The gala began, and they moved through the crowd together, accepting congratulations, discussing recent authentications, telling the story of their partnership. The official story, the one everyone believed, about the authentication expert who'd been brave enough to expose a criminal, about the criminal who'd been reformed by prison and love, about art recovered and justice served. It was a good story, but the real story, the one they knew, was better. It was about a mafia boss who'd let a woman humiliate him in public because it was all part of his plan. A plan to save the art he loved. A plan to protect the woman he loved. A plan that had worked perfectly, even though it had cost him everything. And as Mia stood in her gallery, surrounded by masterpieces that had been saved by their partnership, she thought about that girl in the Vermeer, still reading her letter, still caught in that perfect moment of discovery, still beautiful after all these years, just like